What are some weird historical facts or events that most people don't know about? As a child, Queen Victoria was isolated and emotionally abused by her mother and her mother's scheming friend Sir John Conroy. They hoped to make the young Victoria, the heiress presumptive, weak-willed and dependent on them, so that they could control her when she became queen and be the power behind the throne. Obviously this didn't work. It did exactly the opposite of working. The only reason King Tut is considered famous is because his tomb was one of few untouched by tomb robbers because he was that unimportant. All major pharaohs had their tomb robbed and Tut's was the first tomb discovered during the time with everything intact. He wasn't an influential or all that memorable pharaoh of his time. King Tut is to King Edward VI of England, too young to rule and died too early to be effective. I think the most fascinating part about this is that his tomb still had intricate artifacts that, to us, are incredibly ornate. I cannot begin to imagine what was in an important pharaoh's tomb. Before the mid-19th century, dentures were commonly made with teeth pulled from the mouths of dead soldiers. Peter the Great executed his wife's lover, then forced her to keep her lover's head in a jar of alcohol in her bedroom. Peter don't mess around. Thomas Jefferson had ram as a pet. He called it the abominable animal. It was aggressive as heck, and Jefferson usually tied it outside buildings he was in, and it attacked a lot of people just walking by. It killed a boy even. He only had it killed once it started attacking his other sheeps. WTF Thomas. Gladiators endorsed products like modern sports stars do. Eastern spices taste so good. Albert Einstein could have been president of Israel when it was formed, but he declined. Classics Sheen. A spiritualist who believed in harnessing orgone, as in orgasm, energy sent Einstein what is fundamentally a nonsense machine for harnessing the energy. Einstein spent an afternoon trying to analyze this thing before sending an apologetic letter explaining that this machine was just nonsense. The First Vibrator. Benjamin Franklin wrote an essay about farts, and another about how young men should sleep with old women. 26th President Theodore Roosevelt was an ardent supporter of William Howard Taft. The two were longtime friends, and Taft was Roosevelt's most trusted cabinet member. When Roosevelt's latter term came to a close, he successfully campaigned for Taft's election to the presidency. However, when Taft began enacting many policies that his predecessor found disagreeable, Roosevelt grew sour towards his friend. He vied for the Republican presidential nomination and failed. He then literally marched his supporters out of the Republican Convention Hall and created a new party. Under this new party's banner, Roosevelt split the Republican vote and ensured Taft's defeat. The Bull Moose Party. Teddy didn't take no bull. Thomas Jefferson collected so many books in his lifetime that he would go into debt. After the British burned Washington, D.C. in the Battle of 1812, he sold most of his books to the Library of Congress to replace those that were lost in the fire. Jefferson had spent 50 years accumulating a wide variety of books in several languages and in many subjects, including philosophy, science, literature, architecture, law, religion, and mathematics. The nearly 6,500 books netted him $23,950. On the Lewis and Clark expedition, a vote regarding what direction they should go was held on the coast of Washington amongst the party members. This vote included Sacagawea and York, Lewis' slave. Thus, because the expedition was funded by the US military, this was the first time in American history where a woman and black man were allowed to participate in a vote of any kind related to government affairs. Legend holds that the Renaissance artist Raphael died of exhaustion and fatigue due to excessive fornication with his mistress, Fornerina, Badam TSS. Hitler's original plan for the Jewish was to deport them to Madagascar. When that failed for obvious reasons, mass forever sleep was the backup. Over 1/3 of the men who served in the Waffen-SS were neither German nor ethnic German. Common or ethnic German. I think it's pretty safe to say that none of the people who served in the Waffen-SS were very ethical people. The sound made by the Krakatoa volcanic eruption in 1883 was so loud it ruptured eardrums of people 40 miles away, traveled around the world 4 times, and was clearly heard 3,000 miles away. That's like you standing in New York and hearing a sound from San Francisco. You didn't have to be ethnically Spanish to be a conquistador. There were conquistadors from England and Germany, but the rules to become one involved Hispanicizing your name and converting to Catholicism if you weren't already Catholic. Hernando de Soto is responsible for the collapse of several North American civilizations and the death of untold millions of people. He and his band of men were the first Europeans to make a concerted expedition into what's now the USA. He started in Florida and eventually his men made it to Louisiana, with many detours along the way. De Soto dies along the way, but that's unimportant. What's important is that they brought about 300 pigs with them for food because they breed quickly and can live off of almost anything. Unfortunately, they also serve as a host for various diseases that humans are susceptible to. Lots of the pigs escaped, reproduced, destroyed farmland, and spread diseases. By the time the next Europeans came to those areas, the civilizations De Soto and his men saw had utterly collapsed and the population had catastrophically fallen as well. Similarly, the vast numbers of buffalo and passenger pigeons are thought to be a result of the death of North American native peoples and the collapse of their civilizations, particularly the ability to maintain agricultural systems. That's also thought to be tied to a period of global cooling as an entire continent's worth of people stopped using fire to control plant growth and forests expanded massively, resulting in vast amounts of CO2 being pulled from the atmosphere. Magellan is not the first person to circumnavigate the globe. He never made it. He died in the Philippines. There was a 100-hour war between El Salvador and Honduras in 1969. The war caused the death of about 3,000 people. The war was triggered by a football, soccer, game. It has been known as the Football War. And we still hate each other to this day. Also, I love your username. It is common practice to wear the bottom button of a vest waistcoat undone. Sometimes, vests are even cut with the bottom edge curving away so that the button is purely decorative. The reason for this is that Edward VI of England was a fatus. He undid his bottom button for gut comfort, and it turned into the style as courtiers imitated him. Relatedly, the fashion of wearing wigs, which prevailed in European fashion for 150 years, started because the French king got bald and needed one. The Roman Senate of the Roman Republic wasn't officially supposed to be a legislative body with authority to pass laws. Officially, it could only recommend legislation to the magistrates, who didn't technically have to obey. However, there was an extremely strong precedent to obey official advice from the Senate, so it almost always was followed during the Republican period. During the Empire, the authority of the Senate was reduced further. It's worth noting, however, that the Senate didn't only issue advice outside of legislative issues. They did have other authorities and powers in addition to the immense influence they carried. Something I always like to talk about. There once existed an alleged theoretical state of war that lasted 335 years and 19 days, and was between the Dutch and an archipelago off the coast of southwest England called the Isles of Scilly. What's more, there were no casualties, because the Dutch forgot that they were at war with the Isles. It wasn't until a Scilly historian contacted the Dutch about the war in 1985 and received the information that the war was still technically ongoing that a peace treaty was signed in 1986. Just imagine if they gathered to end this war and the leaders started arguing about who won, so much so that a real war would break out. Fidel Castro actually wanted to be allies with America, since they were only 70 miles north, a world superpower, and Cuba desperately needed economic assistance, but because of containment and strong anti-communist sentiment, Eisenhower and Nixon both refused to meet him, so Castro turned to the other world superpower, the Soviet Union, for economic assistance, and Khrushchev welcomed him with open arms, and that's how the Cuban Missile Crisis began. Not really weird, but a fun piece of history that not many people know about is the origin of an announcer calling a horse race. On the 5th of February, 1927 in Tijuana, Mexico, there was a film being shot at the racetrack. A track official noticed the way a director was using a microphone and a loudspeaker to direct his crew and actors during the filming. The idea came to him that if he had a microphone set up in the steward's booth that led to a set of speakers, he could call the positions of the horses like a director gave direction. Later that day, he had it set up without telling any of the patrons to the track about it. When people first experienced it, they were extremely confused. Before that, people would keep track of the horses themselves with binoculars and often were unable to get a great view at certain angles. After they got used to it, they loved hearing a race being called and it became an everyday thing at that small track. Now, it's an extremely important part of modern day racing all across the world, and even people that aren't familiar with the sport know about it. During his travels in Africa, the guy that invented Jameson liquor bought an 11-year-old girl as a slave and then fed her to cannibals just to see what it was like. He sketched while they ate her. Typing hard, you sick bee. In medieval times, the accused often faced a trial by ordeal, where they were forced to stick their arm into a vat of boiling water. If their arm emerged unscathed, it was believed God protected them, thus proving their innocence. They also had a trial by iron up to the 18th century, where you had to hold a red-hot iron bar in your hand and run a specified distance. The hand would then be wrapped up and you would wait a few days. If your hand skin was corrupted when the bandages came off, then that was God deeming you guilty and you were hanged. Simpler times. The Twilight Zone was one of the first television shows to feature a nearly all-black cast on a dramatic show that was not dealing with racial issues. This was all because of Rod Serling, who was quoted in saying, "Television, like its big sister, the motion picture, has been guilty of a sin of omission. Hungry for talent, desperate for the so-called new face, constantly searching for a transfusion of new blood, it has overlooked a source of wondrous talent that resides under its nose. This is the Negro actor." The episode was The Big Tall Wish, which was part of the first season of the show, and it was awarded the 1961 Unity Award for outstanding contributions to better race relations. Pope Gregory IX called for black cats to be killed as he believed they are incarnations of Satan. The mass killing of cats increased the number of rats in Europe. The increased number of rats helped to spread the plague all throughout Europe. He also had a steam yacht called the Saucisson, which was moored off the West Indies, in which he hosted the entire England cricket team and the Balinese goddess of plenty. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died on the same day, the 4th of July, 1826, America's 50th birthday. Adams' last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He was wrong. Jefferson had died hours earlier in Virginia. Max Tremel, a priest on a winter walk one day in 1894, witnessed a young boy slip through some broken ice on the river and saved the boy from certain drowning. That boy was Adolf Hitler. 10-minute lobotomies. Two methods were used. Either had to drill holes in head, or the later method that was using a metal picter was used to hammer through eye sockets. In both method, a metal instrument was used to mush brain. Local anesthesia was used. The patient could go home in the same day. The doctor did a couple of thousand of these and could do multiple surgeries a day. Also, because anesthetic was costly, they just stunned the patient with an electroshock therapy machine, which was pretty commonly available. Salieri did not kill Mozart. This is a legend. Mozart drank and died in poverty. I heard that it was also a myth that he died in poverty, had a pauper's burial. Apparently a lot of money was spent on his funeral as well. I actually have something for this. During the evacuation of Dunkirk in World War II, in that moment of despair, desperation and overall bleakness, on the beach there was a workers' strike by a group of British rail workers regarding overtime. A very strange thing to happen in the face of events. Beach, I'll say. Where's this Dunkirk location with a tree? Mexico lost part of its territory in part due to the abolishment of slavery. The Romans used human urine as mouthwash. President LBJ would have highways cleared out by the Secret Service, get in a car with a 6-pack of beer, and gun it down the highway, downing beer after beer. You can leave Texas, but Texas never leaves you, lol. The first vending machine dispensed holy water. The Tulsa, Oklahoma race riot. In 1921, what was called the Black Wall Street was burned to the ground, and whites actually used machine guns on black people. And fricking airplanes. When Fort Sumter was attacked by the Confederates in 1861, no one had gotten killed from the attack, but the Confederates later had a party, for a reason I do not know, and when one of their drunk asses shot a gun, it killed one of their own. That was the only death that occurred during the 3 days of the attack on Fort Sumter. Confederates kept on partying even though they saw the man dead. The CIA made a spy cat, a cat that could lurk around and record information that they sunk several $1 million into, and it promptly walked into traffic. The Soviets had anti-tank dogs. Dogs that they strapped explosives to that didn't want to run at the tanks for obvious reasons and frequently blew up their own forces. I always heard the Soviet anti-tank dogs failed because they were trained with Soviet tanks, so promptly ignored the enemy and went straight towards Soviet tanks, as they were trained to do. During the 16th century, Nicolas Fouquet was the Minister of Finances of France under King Louis XI. He had the castle of Vaux-le-Vicomte built for a shitload of money, and had the most rad of parties there. 16th century, they still said things like rad then. He invited the king at one of those parties, and made it the raddest of all rad parties, like top 3 raddest in France's history. Looking at all the food and fireworks and fountains and all the bling, King Louis XIV found it suspicious. Where is the money coming from? He was also very much jealous of such splendor when his own castle was mostly empty. So Louis XIV had Fouquet arrested, imprisoned, then investigated and found guilty, in that order. Arrested by D'Artagnan, the guy who inspired Alexander Dumas' Fourth Musketeer, and then he ordered a castle of Versailles to be made even more beautiful than Vaux-le-Vicomte. First law of the 48 Laws of Power. American doctors were secretly sterilizing women in the 70s, in America. There was a gang war called the Great Nordic Biker War, where hundreds of American bikers stole armaments from several Scandinavian military bases and terrorized the streets while killing each other. They stole the weapons originally to sell back in the States, but a bandit used an anti-tank rocket to destroy a Hells Angels clubhouse in Sweden. When the barbarians sacked Carthage, they burned and pillaged pretty much everything but the sanctuary where St. Augustine was staying. He was on his deathbed, and the barbarians respected him so much for his influence, even though they hated the church, that they decided to leave him alone. King Tut's parents were incestuous. They were brother and sister. If your grandparents are over the age of 80, they will have lived 1/3 of US history. If you are 30, you will have lived 1/8 of US history. What are some wholesome historical facts not taught in school? In 2006, while the Ivory Coast was in the midst of a civil war, the opposing sides agreed to a ceasefire so that they could all watch the World Cup. The break in fighting paved the way for a peace agreement a year later. Didier Drogba, legend. During the Revolutionary War, a British general left his dog behind during a chaotic retreat. When the Continental Army found the lost dog, George Washington had a messenger go under a truce flag to return the dog to its owner. Truly a human's best friend. The F1 German Grand Prix in 1976. After Niki Lauda crashed while hitting a barrier and catching a light, rival drivers Arturo Merzario, Guy Edwards, Harold Ertel and Brett Lunger all stopped their cars and ran to Lauda's aid. There are many such instances of this happening during the 50s right through the 80s, of championship drivers forfeiting a win to save a rival's life. And then he won his second championship the very next year. He also retired from driving, then came back, and won another championship 2 years later by half a point. After a crash like he had. Most drivers wouldn't be the same after that. Not Niki though, it just made him stronger. R.I.P. Niki. During World War II, a German fighter pilot spotted a damaged American bomber, and rather than shooting it down, he decided to escort it to safety. Decades later, the two pilots found each other and became friends. AWW. I think I saw a documentary on that before, or some video of the reunion. Not sure if it's the same thing though. When the pharaoh Mentuhotep II's harem daughter died around 2050 BC, he mourned. She was only 5 years old. Her tomb, touchingly, was inscribed with the pet name Might. This is translated to kitten. OP said wholesome. Now I'm about to shed a tear. The candy bomber. After World War II ended and Berlin was divided, the UK and US dropped food into West Berlin by plane. One pilot, Gail Halverson, started to donate his candy rations to the children, and soon other pilots started doing the same. To let the children know that it was his plane, the one with the candy, they would wiggle the plane's wings before the drop. Word spread and more children would come, and it started a new PR campaign and started to change the mindset that Americans had of giving food aid to Europe. I always thought the story was really sweet. Halverson's still around, too. He turns 100 this the 10th of October. My Balkanic friends have told me that the bitter combats of the wars after the breakup of Yugoslavia used to stop because both sides liked watching Mexican soap operas. Ah, Mexican soap operas, the true olive branch. The India-Pakistan border is one of the most disputed ones in the world, giving rise to the world-renowned hostilities between India and Pakistan. There was a time once, a prominent Indian singer, namely Lata Mangeshkar, had gone to perform a concert for the soldiers there. As soon as the show began, Pakistani troops started firing rounds in the air, yelled obscenities and said, "We want to hear her voice too," so Indian forces turned up the speakers and pointed them towards the border. Pakistani forces returned the favor when prominent Pakistani singers came to perform for them. I've heard that Indian and Pakistani soldiers get together to watch the India vs Pakistan cricket matches. The only reason the pilgrims stopped at Plymouth Rock was they were running out of beer. They had to grow barley and hops. Based on Eric the Red's account, the first ritual done in the New World was when a German, Balkan, slave was found praising the berries identical to ones used for brewing in his homeland. Ringo Starr once decided the Beatles didn't need him and decided to take a holiday with the intention of never coming back. When John, Paul and George found out, they went all the way to where he was staying just to convince him to come back. As I recall, he got sick of all the bickering during the recording of the White Album, so it's actually Paul playing the drums on the first few songs. When Ringo came back, his drum kit was all decked out with flowers. Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers who believed that the light of God shined in everyone regardless of ethnicity or religion. They were known for treating the indigenous people relatively well and welcomed the first synagogue in North America in Philadelphia. That is true. They also created the basis for solitary confinement in prisons, so there are some drawbacks. In the Second World War, British Lieutenant Commander Gerard Broadmeadow was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross because a German admiral who witnessed his gallantry in action wrote to the British and recommended the award. There was a huge fight about African Americans using the public pool in Mr. Rogers' actual neighborhood, so he made an episode on his show where he and an African American guest were sharing a kiddie pool and talking about being nice to people even if they look or sound different. He taught a whole generation that racism isn't fair or right. Mr. Rogers always said he was feeding his fish out loud because he had heard that a little girl who was blind was worried about them. So he audibly said it so she wouldn't have to worry anymore. Not really a historical figure, but one we all know. Mr. Rogers definitely counts as a historical figure and you cannot change my mind. After Commodore Perry forced the opening of Japan to foreign trade, Japan signed many unequal treaties with Western nations. 1888, Mexico signed another treaty with Japan, but Mexico viewed Japan as an equal. The 1888 Mexican-Japanese Treaty was the first time a Western nation treated Japan as an equal. In the late 1930s, fascism was advancing through the world and no one dared to oppose it, except for Mexico. Mexico was the only country that openly protested against the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, Italian and German involvement in the Spanish Civil War, along with the USSR, and finally, the German annexation of Austria. In Vienna we named a square Mexikoplatz, Mexico Square, in honor of Mexico being the only country that protested the Nazi annexation of Austria. Horton Hears, who was written for a Japanese friend of Dr. Seuss immediately following World War II. He wrote it as an allegory about the importance of forgiveness and humanity in a time where much of the world was still bitter at Japan for their role on the war. Horton represents the United States who speaks up for Hoville, the Japanese, to remind them that a person is a person no matter how small. During the Crusades, when Richard the Lionhearted had a fever, all he wanted at the moment was some fruit and a cold drink. His enemy, Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt who had seized control over Jerusalem, heard the news and sent him peaches, pears, and a shipment of ice from a mountain. When he heard that King Richard's horse had been killed, He sent him a bunch of new horses and a stable boy. It's Taunton Island, but I DK about the us. When we had the potato famine, millions of Irish were dying emigrating, and the Choctaw tribe heard of this and despite being extremely poor managed to raise I think around $200. And now we've helped them out and raised $1.5 million to help them with COVID-19. About $6.50 in today's money. There's also a monument in Cork called the Kindred Spirit that was built in honor of the tribes. Imagine that kind of togetherness on a worldwide scale. In the early late 1800s and early 1900s there were a few Supreme Court cases about the color of margarine. The dairy industry couldn't compete as well with margarine dyed the color of butter, so some states tried to pass laws saying margarine had to be pink, which the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional. However, they also decided that yellow margarine was defrauding the public, so for a while margarine was sold white with a packet of yellow dye that you could mix in at home. TLDR, they could believe it was not butter. I can't tell if this is wholesome or not, lol. On Christmas Day 1914, both of the sides of World War I celebrated Christmas together with songs and games. This type of celebrations happened over the whole front in Belgium and France. The soldiers talked to each other like they weren't in war together. Many soldiers wrote in their diary that they didn't expected the enemy to be so kind and friendly and that they wanted to meet with them when the war was over. But a few days later, the leaders of the armies found out about the celebrations and forbid any future meetings between the two sides. There were a few attempts to reconnect during Easter and Christmas, but the soldiers who attempted were punished or killed. There's an amazing movie about this event called Joyonol if you want to know more about it. An actually true fact about Liechtenstein is that Switzerland accidentally invaded Liechtenstein during a Swiss army exercise when some soldiers got lost and accidentally walked into Liechtenstein on 2 separate occasions. So Switzerland has accidentally invaded Liechtenstein twice. 3 times if you count the Swiss missile test that landed in Liechtenstein and lit a forest on fire. Wojtek was a bear that served in the Polish 2nd Artillery Unit. During his service, Wojtek was huge moral boost to the men, fighting multiple men in wrestling matches, eating lit cigarettes, and even foiling a Saudi Arabian plot to attack to camp by discovering a spy in the shower. Wojtek's unit was caught in artillery battle. Wojtek looked around and began carrying artillery shells to the launchers like the men around him. For his service, Wojtek was promoted to corporal and was given a honorable discharge. Wojtek was placed in a local zoo where he was every once in a while known to appear at a child's birthday party. Fellow servicemen from his unit were also known to come by and feed him lit cigarettes, where he also sadly died. In his honor, the Polish Artillery Unit changed its logo to a bear holding an artillery shell. Wojtek was a bear that served in the Polish 2nd Artillery Unit. Nice to meet you, Polish 2nd Artillery Unit. Abraham Lincoln decided to grow a beard because of 11-year-old Grace Biddle. She had written him that she thought he would look more handsome and less sad with a beard, and women would tell their husbands to vote for him. So he grew a beard and was elected. On his way to his inauguration, he took a train and passed through her hometown in Westfield, New York, and met her. The Chicago Public Library originated with a donation of books from Queen Victoria following the Great Chicago Fire. She assumed the city's library had burned down. Pirate ships were actually pretty great, relatively speaking. They were very democratic and pirate crews were pretty well cared for. Also, they took sexual assault against women very seriously. That is, they killed you for it. Also, pirates were really rare. The vast majority of seafaring raiders were privateers, which were basically mercenary ships who were hired by a country to attack the shipping of an enemy nation. There was a Scotsman named Bill Millian who stood on the beaches at Normandy during D-Day calmly playing the bagpipes as shells and machine gun fire streaked past him. The Germans didn't shoot him because they figured he must have been insane. When persecuted Zoroastrians from Persia came to the kingdom of Sanjan in the west coast of India as refugees, the king wasn't sure if he wanted to offer them refuge, so he sent them a full glass of milk implying his kingdom is full. The leader of the Zoroastrians added some sugar to the milk and sent it back to imply the refugees would become part of the kingdom and make it sweeter. They got to stay, and they were a micro-minority. They are one of the most successful community which has left its imprint on every aspect of India. I heard this story before on Reddit, but I think it was adding a lotus that floated or something, I don't know. I was on vacation in Germany over spring break. They have these frog fences. These fences keep the frogs from crossing the roads and getting run over. At the end of the day somebody comes by and gathers the frogs and helps them cross the road. Not only in Germany, and fences are not only to keep the frogs safe but also the drivers. So many frogs might pass a stretch of a road that it gets slippery from all the crushed frogs and somebody could get hurt. But where I live they started installing blue reflectors to the road markers which are designed to warn wildlife, mostly deer, and keep them from running onto the roads. Under a Supreme Court ruling in the 1800s, tomatoes are considered a vegetable because you can't make a dessert out of it. The ruling came from California having tariffs on fruits because at the time it was believed only people with a bit of wealth could buy fruit because they were only really used to make a dessert. Tomatoes were part of the tariff, so people protested and the Supreme Court removed tomatoes from the tariff, meaning they aren't a fruit in the eyes of the law. My fuzzy recollections from the book Founding Brothers. Ben Franklin, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were assigned to stay in France part-time to help build that alliance during the period 1776 to 1787, the period of the Revolutionary War and the Continental Congress. This friendship between France and the colonies guided France to help protect the colonies during the war. The relationship and the protections likely saved the colonies from rule under the English king during the period between the Declaration of Independence and the eventual signing of the US Constitution. Candidate hopefuls for president of the US were expected to not run for the office but rather await being proposed for the position by others. The loser of a presidential election became the vice president. Hence, Washington Adams were the first and then Adams Jefferson after 8 years of Washington. Franklin once almost killed himself trying to electrocute a turkey. He thought it might tenderize the bird. Founding Brothers, BTW, is an excellent way to learn about the founding fathers, their personalities and interactions, and yes, dirty politics. Clark Gable nearly quit Gone with the Wind early in production when he found out that the set was segregated. He told the director that either they'd take down the white and colored signs, or they'd have no Red Butler. He also wanted to boycott the Atlanta premiere when he found out that his black co-stars could not attend. He only went after Hattie McDaniel, who went on to be the first black Oscar winner for her role in the film, urged him to go. He remained close friends with her for the rest of his life. Norway sends a Christmas tree to London every year in thanks to the help we gave them in World War II. It's put up in Trafalgar Square. Until the invention of submarine warfare, it was widely considered an abominable war crime to sink a ship and not try to save its crew. Sinking civilian shipping was completely off limits if preparations were not made to rescue the entire civilian crew and transport them to safety at a port somewhere. It is still technically considered part of customary international law, but it wasn't enforced in World War I or World War II because both sides committed this war crime. Tu quoque, Latin meaning you too, was a valid legal defense in war crimes trials. No Germans could be convicted of a war crime if they could show that the Allies had committed the same crime. An attempt was made to charge a German admiral for having a submarine attack merchant shipping and not save the drowning crew, but he was not convicted, because British and American naval forces had done the same thing. The question was wholesome history. Napoleon was not actually small, he was 5'7" average height back then. The reasons rumors spread about him being small was propaganda coming from the opposing army to rally troops and tease the French. This propaganda was led by the opposing general, who was in fact 4'11". Ironic, isn't it? Napoleon wasn't short when compared to the overall average for the time. However, he was short when compared to his upper class social contemporaries, who tended to be much taller than the lower class due to better diet and nutrition, etc. The man that shares Muhammad Ali's birth name, Cassius Clay, was a staunch abolitionist representative in Kentucky pre-Civil War. He was notable for starting an abolitionist newspaper that he armed with 2 cannons and several small arms to defend it with, fought off several pro-slavery attackers throughout the years, and pressured Lincoln to free all slaves in America. Plus, his house was broken into when he was in his 80s, I believe, and he killed one attacker and wounded another before they fled. The man was a legit badass who fought for what was right in a place that no one would have blamed him for keeping quiet, and to me, that's pretty goddamn wholesome. Within his 50-year diary of the 100 Years' War in the 15th century, chronicling endless rapes, murders, and pillage, an anonymous writer in Paris found time to record that there was particularly heavy snow one year, and the citizens made some dang impressive snowmen. He also never fails to tell us whether the year's wine was good or bad. 1424 was a winner, and complains when he can't get his hands on any fresh cherries or soft cheese from Brie. When World War II was concluded, the US military doubted the field reports of their own commanders to such an extreme degree that they ended up using the German field reports that are still used to this day as historical reference. And they say victors write history, literal opposite. Victors do write history, but the US has always been an idiosyncratic place. The pyramids were already 1,000 years old by the time the last woolly mammoth population died off on an island off the northeast coast of Russia. JFK, Oswald, and Jack Ruby all died in the same hospital. I always found the story of Phineas Gage to be fascinating. It is a study in physiology, biology, sociology and criminology. I always felt it was a bit gory for HS, but I think it's fine to study. Good looking dude too. For 30 years, Canada and Denmark were fighting a brutal war over an island in North by leaving their own homemade whiskers and troll letter. The Choctaw Nation, a Native American tribe who were still recovering from being exiled to bumfuck nowhere Oklahoma a couple decades earlier, raised $170 to send to island to help with the ongoing potato blight famine. And due to the impact COVID is having on the Native American people, especially the Navajo, I believe, Irish people have raised millions to help them. The time the Liechtenstein army went to war with, allegedly, 80 men and returned with 81, when an Italian soldier who defected over to Liechtenstein. During the early years of the Ottoman Empire, Muslims, Jews and Christians fought side by side and considered each other as brothers. Although most people prefer the image of Vlad the Impaler as a sadistic psychopath, most of what he did was because he knew he had to employ psychological warfare against the powerful Ottoman Empire. Much like Nolan's Batman, he wanted to be a symbol of fear. One of his most cleverest attacks was the Tegevis night attack, where he infiltrated a camp, alongside a handful of men, dressed as Turks, Inglourious Basterds style. The initial plan was to murder the Sultan, but when that failed, Vlad, who could speak fluent Turkish with a native accent, pretended to be Turkish officer, trick he used several times, and spread chaos through the Turkish chain of command. Obviously, we can't condone all the crap he did, but this one was quality hijinks. Some other wholesome facts about the Turkish. IKEA finally admitted that meatballs are a Turkish invention. Sweden probably got them when Turkey served as an asylum for their King Charles, after he lost at Poltava. Despite the Ottoman Empire being depicted poorly in history and pop culture, they practiced freedom of religion and decriminalized same-sex relationships as far back as 1858. Yeah, that's right. Remember when the Brits imprisoned Turing for being gay? Despite the Ottoman Empire being depicted poorly in history and pop culture, they practiced freedom of religion. This aged like milk near the end of the empire. During World War I on Christmas Eve, the Brits and Germans started singing Silent Night Holy Night, then come morning they hung out and played football. But they probably had some awkward conversations. In Bavaria in 1740, Roman Catholics founded a secret society called Order of the Pug. New members in the society had to wear dog collars and scratch at the door to get in. What is a fact that you think sounds completely false and that makes you angry that it's true? Sympathetic ophthalmia. When you get an injury in one eye and it loses vision, your other eye may randomly decide to go blind as well for no reason. It can happen months or years after the original injury. Sounds like an old wives' tale or some 19th century quack fear-mongering, but completely true. Virginia goes farther west than West Virginia. The fact that it took 4 times the time to go from bronze to iron swords, then iron swords to nuclear weapons. That unlockable means both able to be unlocked and unable to be locked. My 11-year-old pointed this out, and I had nothing for her other than a blank stare and then thinking, well, crap, good job. McDonald's is the largest toy distributor in the world. Lego is the world's largest producer of tires. Chemically, rhinoceros horn is identical to human fingernails, so biting your nails gives you as much health benefit as powdered rhinoceros horn would. Till, you could grind up a bunch of nail clippings into powder and sell it as powdered rhinoceros horn and people wouldn't be able to tell unless they tested for DNA. The fact that this sentence is grammatically correct, all the faith he had no effect. Get ready, James, where John had a better effect on the teacher. Installing traffic light costs cities $250,000, $500,000 at an intersection. The word helicopter is not made up of the words heli and copter, but rather helico and to, which are Greek for spiral and wing. There are more slaves in the world right now than there were at the peak of the Atlantic slave trade. Flammable and inflammable mean the same thing. There is actually a good reason for that. Flammable is not considered a scientifically acceptable term for things that catch fire easily. Inflammable is the proper term and comes from the word inflame. But flammable caught on because inflammable sounds too much like resistant to being caught on fire, which is potentially quite dangerous misunderstanding. The government pays Microsoft to keep Windows XP running cause the government uses Windows XP a lot. The terms hardwood and softwood have nothing to do with the actual hardness of the wood, but what kind of seeds the tree produces. I mean, it basically just means conifer versus angiosperm, and virtually all conifers have softwood. It's just that angiosperms, hardwood, can have soft or hardwood. Not that far off, Imo. Coolth is an actual word and it's the opposite of warmth. I love using it, but my girlfriend freaking hates it. Oh, I am so using this word now. If you mix water and sawdust and freeze it, the resulting ice melts extremely slowly, like weeks at room temperature slowly. We used to saw and chop firewood for the house in the winters, and there were always these stupid chunks of sawdust ice hanging around well into the spring when all the rest had melted. Now I know why. Thanks. All crisps, chips for any Americans, in the UK go out of date on a Saturday. It annoys me because a smug friend pointed it out and I have been unsuccessful in proving him wrong. I had to Google this and found this from Walkers. In the manufacturing sites we work on, production weeks which start on a Sunday. All products produced in that week will have the same best before date. As the week ends on the Saturday, the best before date will always end on a Saturday. Cannoli is already in plural form. The singular form is cannolo. A spaghetto is one noodle of spaghetti. I was talking to my mum about bees one day and telling her where queen bees come from. Basically they start out as a normal bee larvae, but the worker bees feed it special royal jelly that makes it grow into a queen bee. And as the words came out of my mouth I realized how fake it sounded. My mum didn't believe me and I had to Google it later to prove it to her. Walmart is world's largest retailer of diamonds. I don't know if it's true anymore, but Walmart used to be the largest dealer of arms and ammunition in America. Until as early as the 1980s, newborns were not given pain medicine during surgery, only muscle relaxant, as it was falsely accepted they could not feel pain. Imagine going through the pain of a surgery but unable to move due to a muscle relaxant. There are more privately owned tigers in Texas than there are wild tigers on the rest of the planet combined. Mistletoe is a parasite. Half parasite sort of, still a parasite, just wanted people to understand a bit more. It's green, thus can photosynthesize. There are completely white plants that parasite completely. That crocodiles can climb trees. The millionaire heir to the fortune of the American chemical company DuPont, Robert H. Richards, has avoided prison after upping his 3-year-old daughter because a judge considered he wouldn't fare well in prison. Oh, this is the worst one by far. Pretty much anything to do with naked mole rats. They are neither related to moles nor rats, they can use their teeth like chopsticks, they have the social hierarchy of bees, and oh yeah, they are cold-blooded. They're also almost entirely resistant to cancer. Scientists tried to force a bunch of them to develop cancer and only like 2 actually ended up with cancer. Bananas are berries but strawberries are not berries. Raspberries, blackberries and boysenberries are also not berries. The fact that in an electric circuit, even though the electric current is electrons moving from negative pole to positive pole, the definition of a current flow is that it moves from positive to negative, and similar misses in definitions in physics science that was just decided to stay because changing definitions would be confusing at first. Bonus: the guy who fricked it up was Ben Franklin. Not actually making me angry about it, but it makes me feel weird. Cheetahs can't roar. They can only meow like normal house cats. In the cat family, cats can either roar or purr, but can't do both. It's to do with the structure of the throat. I'm sorry that cheetahs can't roar, but I hope you find some solace in the thought of them purring happily. Incidentally, cheetahs are different from other big cats in another way too. They can't retract their claws completely. The fact you can sneeze and or cough so hard you can break a rib. Like how? Why? Well, if your body's options are A, suffocate in a few minutes because your airway is obstructed, or B, maybe don't die in the next 5 minutes but have fun for the next few months with a broken rib. IDK option B sounds better. English bulldogs can't give birth naturally. Humanity has ruined them and it's time to let them die. There were still mammoths roaming the earth as the pyramids were being built. I think the last ones died more recently than we imagined. Some 3000 years back, on an Arctic island north of Russia, can't recall the name. That a black panther isn't its own species of big cat, but rather any big cat species that is born black. Typically referring to leopards and jaguar, though. That being said, melanistic leopards and jaguars look similar, but a melanistic tiger or lion looks quite different. Kind of like how doves and pigeons are the same thing. But, at least where I'm from, doves refer to all white pigeons. Reno, Nevada is further west than Los Angeles, California. Jacksonville, Florida, on the east coast of North America, is west of all of South America. A flock of crows is called a murder, but a flock of ravens is called an unkindness or a conspiracy. Who even comes up with this crap? There is only one country between Norway and North Korea. Funding for a public school is cut if standardized test scores are too low. I don't get the logic on that. That the capybara is so useless that its main defense is to stand still and wait to be eaten. It's basically a vegetable made from meat. Someone lost their stomach after swallowing liquid nitrogen. Suicide Squad has won more Oscars than the Shawshank Redemption. From 1719-1721, prisoners in Paris were given their freedom if they agreed to marry a prostitute and move to Louisiana. Explains a lot about Louisiana. Blind people don't see black. They just don't. They don't see. The only way to understand is to be blind, and that infuriates me. Yeah, this one bothers me too. I'd love to have someone who could see and then lost their sight completely. Try to explain the difference between seeing black when you close your eyes and just literally not seeing. I can't even fathom it. Apple turned their China customer data stored on iCloud over to the China government. WTF, how is this not more commonly known knowledge? We're closer to 2044 than we are to 1990. Shut your freaking mouth. The pronunciations of Kansas and Arkansas are not at all similar. I'm Aussie, so I haven't heard Arkansas said out loud often. I was old enough before I learned how it's actually said. What are some very comforting facts? Scientists, earlier this year, made a massive breakthrough in curing blindness, like verging a cure. It was masked by the virus headline though. In Switzerland, it is illegal to own just one guinea pig because they are very social animals. It's considered animal abuse to only have one. My heart. All those embarrassing cringy memories that come flooding into your mind when you least expect it, but nobody else remembers them. Every last one of us has them. It's part of this complicated process called living. While you're busy remembering yours, everyone else is remembering their own. It's in the past. Nothing you can do right now can make it any better. Chalk it up as a lesson and reap the EXP. That's not true. I still remember when Chelsea did a flip during gymnastics in 3D grade and farted mid-flip. About 65% of America's aluminum is currently recycled. Every minute an average of 123,097 aluminum cans are recycled. On average, Americans recycle 2 out of every 3 aluminum cans they use. The average aluminum can contains more than 50% post-consumer recycled aluminum. It's just aluminum, but it shows that we can as a society recycle over half of the stuff we use, and we can start keeping the world clean. That and a push to renewable energy would be nice. Pretty long write-up just for a can pun. Your body is home to its own unique ecosystem, the human gut. Sounds gross, but billions of little creatures living inside you are helping you digest things, dispose of waste, and survive natural toxins in the food you consume. If you ever feel like you're useless, or that your existence means nothing, that's not true. You literally mean the world to your gut flora. This is my swamp. There's a volunteer organization called No One Dies Alone. You're at Sacred Hearts Medical Center. You're terminal. You need a companion. From someone to talk to, or just someone to hold our hand. They'll make sure someone will be there for you. Other hospitals have this too. I would like to volunteer for that. I have compassion like a motherfucker. Cheetahs are very shy animals, so some zoos give them support dogs like those for humans. It's the cutest thing ever. In dog wolf movies where they use real life dog actors, the people who have to edit all that sometimes have to add CGI tails because their dogs can't stop wagging their tail as they are so happy. I used to have a sweetheart of a dog who loved to roughhouse. She was big, and her play growls sounded scary if you didn't know how gentle she really was. Ever since her, when I see attack dogs on screen, I notice they often have the same body language and tone she had. After nearly 2 years, the DRC finally declared the end of its Ebola outbreak. Jupiter gravitational mass is so immense modern science believe it's been protecting us from meteors for millions of years. Thank you, Jupiter. Stan Lee started creating the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Iron Man, etc. at around 40, so even if you think that you can't get anything out of life, you still can push yourself creatively and leave a lasting impact on the world at an older age. I used to be a caregiver at a retirement home. I took care of a lady who started painting when she was 60 and kind of had an accidental career. She sold lots of paintings to hotels and in street fairs. She had a 20-year run as painter. Scientists have discovered that rats love playing hide and seek and squeal with joy when finding being found. I've always wanted a pet rat. This made me want one even more. My boyfriend has a panic and anxiety disorder. Whenever he gets a panic attack, one of our cats will sit on him and purr loudly. It always comforts him and calms him down. We always joke that she is our little support animal. She is very attuned to our emotions and feelings. When my grandmother passed away and I was very sad, she would not leave me alone. She would just sit next to me in silence or occasionally let out a small mew to inform me she was still there. So, as conclusion, even if you are having a crap day, your pet still loves you. I heard cat purrs are at the perfect frequency to encourage healing. Also, cats secrete a hormone which makes humans happy. That's a very good cat. 1. A penguin was once knighted in Norway. 2. Blind people can smile even though they have never seen one. It is human nature. 3. The voice actors of Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse got married in real life. A knighted penguin that holds the rank of brigadier lives in Edinburgh Zoo. He was promoted in 2016. Liechtenstein once deployed 80 men for protecting the border against Austria. Despite their worries, they saw exactly 0 combat. When they called it a day, they returned home with 81 men. Because an Italian bloke bumped into them and wanted to come live in Liechtenstein, they literally made a friend on the way. But the real homeland defense was the friend they made along the way. An eiderdown comforter by Matuk sells for over $16,000. Eiderdown is harvested by collecting it from the eider's nest, making it the only down product that doesn't result in harm to the bird. I don't know. If I was an eider bird, I'd be pretty pissed off if someone kept nicking my bed every time I left it alone for a minute. It doesn't matter how old you are, it's still okay to hug a teddy bear or soft absorbent toy of your choice when you are heartbroken and need someone to cry on. My wife and I have a stuffed elephant that was our newborn's before he passed due to premature birth difficulties that sits between us when we sleep. Some nights we both hug it and other nights one of us will have it snuggled up on our side of the bed. It does help. I heard a cat meowing outside today, so I went out to say hi, and it just came right up and flopped down on the sidewalk in front of me. Scritches were given. Think of all the worst days of your life. You've made it through every single one of them and are still going strong. There's always another day on the other side. I'm not sure, but I think I heard this line in an old Woody Woodpecker cartoon when I was a kid. You don't need to worry about tomorrow, because the day after tomorrow will have passed. Poorly traduced from French since I couldn't find the original. Sorry, I don't know why, but this has stuck since my childhood and I find it very comforting. If you've lost someone, and you feel like that are completely gone from your life, think about the impact they have had on you, on your loved ones, on others, and think of how that impact continues to live on throughout all of life. That impact won't die with them either. The chain of life goes on. Existing is hard, but most things around you are also alive and going through their own cycles. So in a way, you're on this together. Malala Yousafzai, the girl who was shot in the head by the Taliban for insisting on going to school, recently completed her final exams in the University of Oxford. She is also the youngest person to receive a Nobel Prize. Whenever I've experienced heartbreak or something scary or intimidating, I remind myself I'm not the first person ever to have gone through, and for some reason I always find it comforting. I'm not the first person to be scared or sad, and thousands of others have gotten through what I'm going through, and if they can get through it, why can't I? I'm the same. Like when I make a big mistake at work, I know I'm not the first to freak up and the world hasn't ended. Given all the atoms in the universe are recycled in various ways, having formed in the first stars, our entire body has already experienced billions of years of each atom's own personal history. Even more comforting, it's plausible those atoms will eventually become part of someone else in the future and will continue to exist in various forms, transforming continuously, until the end of time itself. So in a way, we're connected to something absolutely eternal, and our ultimate fate is to be spread across the stars. Heck, depending how deep you want to get, there's also a tiny chance that your pattern of DNA will form entirely by chance again, creating someone that is biologically you but with a whole new memory, experiences and history. Basically, everyone and everything is connected. The best part? None of this is based on religion or wishful thinking. It's actual established and current scientific fact. What I took from this is that I'm part pterodactyl. No matter how anxious you feel you are, no matter how ridden by fear you feel you are, every single one of us is a genetic survivor of hundreds of thousands of years of survivors. Each one of us came from a line of people who made the next correct intuitive move, survived incredibly difficult things, and were able to pass their genes on. So almost to the biological level, you can relax into a trust that when the moment comes where you will be faced with the biggest challenge, you will be able to draw on a deep reservoir of shared human consciousness that will say, now it's time to make the next move, and we can do this. Elizabeth Gilbert. Van Gogh didn't start painting until his late 20s. J.K. Rowling didn't publish Harry Potter until her late 30s. Samuel L. Jackson didn't get his first big role until his 40s. It's never too late to be who you might have been. It should be mentioned that Van Gogh sold only one painting in his life. People see you 20% more attractive than you see yourself. I feel like this is made up number, but I'll take it. During the Second World War, a Muslim man owned a mosque in Paris. After France got captured by the Germans, the French Jews were being killed. The Muslim man offered every Jew he could find shelter in his mosque and handed out fake Muslim certificates so they wouldn't be questioned. He saved over 400 lives. No one's your enemy, except for the ones you make yourself believe are. My country is pushing for a series of laws that would make ecocide, the destruction of the ecosystem, a punishable crime. When I sit on the couch, my dog likes to cuddle between my body and the cushion and sleep with his head resting on my shoulder. Be the person your dog thinks you are. Since animals have evolved next to human for thousands of years, they have learned to show their feeling towards us. Dogs will wag their tag, lick you, step on your feet, press their body against your legs, lay on you, etc. All in effort to show affection and be as close as physically possible to you. Cats make eye contact and slowly blink at you to say I am comfortable, I am pleased. They headbutt you as their form of a hug. They groom you as they would a kitten to care for you. They rub their scent on you to say this is my human. All mine, and it reassures them of your bond. Cows will also groom you and enjoy being pet as it is relaxing and they truly trust you. Also, elephants get excited and happy looking at humans because we are to them as dogs are to us. They think we're cute and want to play and pet us. It is estimated every 10 years, the cells in your body will have been replaced with new ones. Therefore, you get a new body every 10 years, making it so you do get a fresh start. You can tell whether a newborn baby is sick or not by looking at the color of the mother's breast milk. When a newborn baby is sick or has an infection of some kind, the mother's breast milk composition is altered so that it produces enough immune cells to fight off the infection. This occurs when cells are transmitted from the baby's saliva during breastfeeding. A mother's body is freaking amazing. Despite the fact that the universe is roughly 13.8 billion years old, you managed to exist around the same time as Bob Ross and Mr. Rogers. We have been born into arguably the best point in human history. True that we have a whole slew of troubles. These issues are only minor examples compared to the plagues, social Darwinism, and overall pretty crap quality of life you'd live say 100 years back. We still have those plagues, racial biases and hatred, but we are lucky that we are alive in a time where over the past century so many strides towards equality have been made. Except black licorice, we are unfortunately still in that era. The world is more literate, healthier and well-fed than at any time in human history. The percentage of people starving to death has been on a downward trajectory for years. You are less likely to be assaulted or robbed than your parents. You are living a second on Earth that nobody has ever lived before. So every moment of your life you are making history. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here, and whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Max Ehrmann, Desalinator. No matter how bad things are, someone is going to come along on AskReddit and ask the opposite question to a hugely popular question within a day or so. Don't feel bad next time you mess something up. Every single living thing is an accident. Evolution was just a series of some cell messing up. It's literally nature to make mistakes. Every cell in our body contains molecules that were something else in the past. Maybe they were in your parents' cells, maybe in the food you ate, in the cultivated land, and so on. And you can do the same reasoning also in terms of time. Maybe your cells contains molecules from an ancient Roman spear of a simple soldier. I find this amazing. The vast majority of people are actually decent. Also, we don't need to find meaning. We literally create it ourselves. Everything that matters to someone. Everything that is beautiful in the eyes of someone. The universe does care. We're the part doing the caring. There is no inherent purpose in life. That seems awful, but think about it for a minute. Any goal, any purpose, any achievement, any victory, any lesson, they are all yours. They are entirely yours. No one is handing you a half-completed work of art and telling you to finish it. When you face the end, you know that your fate and your victories belong to you and no one else. You're free. I hope these are comforting to others, but they certainly are to me. I never met my paternal grandfather, Gil. He died before I was born. When I got married, my father gave me Grandpa Gil's wedding band, because I didn't have one. Grandpa Gil's ring fit me perfectly, with no alteration. I've recently developed an interest in woodworking, particularly with hand tools. For my birthday this year, my parents gave me some tools that belonged to my grandpa. When I picked them up, I felt such a strong connection to a man I've never met, and the thought that his wedding band was reunited with objects it had touched over 40 years ago brought tears to my eyes. I say all that to say this: you are connected to the people who came before you in ways that may never occur to you. You are another in a long line of unique, fascinating, and human lives, stretching back to the beginning of time. How cool is that? I'm 19 weeks pregnant today, so my miscarriage rate has dropped to 0.1%. After undergoing 6 rounds of infertility treatments and 2 miscarriages, this stat is very comforting to me. People of Reddit, what is a surprisingly unknown survival fact that everyone should know? You can squeeze relatively safe water out of moss. Obviously you should still boil it and it's going to have some dirt, but it's way better than drinking out of a steam or puddle. A lot of modern outdoorsy backpacks have whistles built into the clips on the straps across your chest. Not many people know about these. Save your voice whistle for help ward off animals. Some school backpacks have this too. Took my child 5 minutes to discover it after we got home. I was not impressed. I thought the thing was just a plastic pull tab. If you ever fall into freezing water and need to warm up fast, don't rub your arms. I know it's instinctive to do so. Put your hands and arms near your core and heat up your chest first. That will keep you from going into hypothermic shock. Liam Neeson taught us this in Batman Begins. Your arms will take care of themselves. If you are stranded in a desert with many cacti in the area, don't eat one right away, as some could be poisonous. Instead, cut it open and place a small amount on the inner part of your lower lip and wait a few minutes to an hour. If it swells up or causes inflammation, don't eat it because it will kill you. If it does do this, then there's a good chance it won't hurt you if you eat it. It'll quench ya. Finally, a thread I can meaningfully contribute to. I have a list actually. No matter where you are in the world, it's likely that you'll find beer bottles in the woods. Broken glass makes one heck of a good impromptu knife. Evergreen trees, pine, spruce, cedar, balsam, are one of the greatest resources you can be blessed with. Pine nuts taste good and are very nutritious. Squirrels love to hang out in them, so they offer good trapping or hunting locations. The inner bark of all species of pine can be eaten even in the dead of winter. Resin from these trees makes amazing glue and is antiseptic, so use it to seal cuts. Fluffed up pine needles will catch fire very easily if they are dead and dry. The roots make fairly durable and strong rope by themselves or 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 by them. Fishing without fish hooks and proper line is almost always a waste of time. You're better off spending your energy catching frogs and making traps for animals that come to the water's edge to drink. Crushed up charcoal added to drinking water can help get rid of the swampy taste. That's all for now. I have more, but I don't wanna spam, so let me know if you all want more. I want more. If you're stuck in a particular location or are traveling back to one, tie a bag around some plants or tree leaves and leave a rock in the bottom. You'll be able to collect water. If you're stuck outdoors in the winter and need water, don't eat the snow. Rather, collect it in a bag and melt it between layers of clothing before drinking. Moral of the story: carry bags. And don't eat yellow snow. Heard this from a cop friend. If somebody is ever trying to take you or puts a gun or knife to you to get you away in a public place, you just got to start screaming and fighting. Even if you're shot or stabbed, at least medical attention can get to you relatively fast. If they manage to get you someplace private, your chances of rescue decrease. Maybe not super unknown, but a good survival tip to remember. Candles make excellent fire starters. I keep one in my backpack always. Even if wood is wet, you can dry it out. I've got one that lasts 9 hours and never leaves my pack. One caveat: you can't light rotten wood. If you hit a piece of wood against a rock and it sounds hollow, it will light. A good trick is to dip some twigs in the candle wax. Even if they were soggy twigs, they'll now burn amazingly. Use them to get a bigger fire going. Beware that if you have a little ember of a fire, putting candle wax on it will put it out. It takes some knack to know when wax will help or hinder. Rule of sevens. The amount of radiation present after a nuclear explosion decreases with every 7-fold increment of time after the first hour. After 7 hours, radiation will be a tenth of what it was immediately after detonation. After 49 hours, radiation will be a tenth of that amount, and so on. Providing the place you end up in still has its walls roof intact, your best chance for survival is to make it as airtight as possible and wait. No amount of radiation is safe, but the longer you are able to stay put before moving, the better. When you finally leave, try to pick the calmest weather to move in. More wind present means more irradiated particles flying around. Cover yourself head to toe in as much gear as you can to limit exposure, and head in the opposite direction to the blast epicenter. When arriving at a more suitable location, remove all garments exposed to the elements and either wash thoroughly or bag and discard them. Wash your skin and hair as best as you are able. Radiation is nasty crap, and definitely something you want to be aware of if you manage to survive the hellfire and cyclonic wind. Also, never use conditioner after exposure, it's a great way to make things 10x worse. If you're waiting to turn across traffic and there's traffic going around you, keep your dang wheels straight. If someone rams you from behind, you're going in the direction your wheels are pointing. If you're pointing straight, you'll just get shunted forward. If you've started turning, you're getting pushed into oncoming traffic. If you're sliding on ice, turn into the slide to correct it. Do not turn in the opposite direction of the slide. You'll start drifting. I didn't believe this until I started sliding to the right, and when I cranked my wheel to the right, my car magically corrected itself. It's called an inertia drift, I think. If you have to use an EpiPen, I'm too lazy to look for the generic name. You must keep it pressed for a couple of seconds. Look at the instruction, it may vary from like 3 to 10 seconds. Also, if it doesn't seem to work with one and for whatever there is a second available, use it. It won't kill anybody. And finally, make sure the needle will not go to your hand. When you go into a building, always look for your main exit and a backup exit. If you need to evacuate quickly, you will know where to go and won't get lost in the herd. Stairwells, bank vaults, and freezers are safe places to be during a tornado if you can't get underground. All are better reinforced than other parts of a building and are typically what remains standing after a tornado. No sir, I'm not robbing the bank. I'm just hiding from the tornado. Shelter, fire, water, food, prioritize in that order. Also the rule of 3. You can survive for 3 minutes without air, oxygen, or in icy water. You can survive for 3 hours without shelter in a harsh environment unless in icy water. You can survive for 3 days without water, if sheltered from a harsh environment. You can survive for 3 weeks without food, if you have water and shelter. Something I think about sometimes is I heard a story about a couple that got lost in the woods for a long time. It was life and death. So out of desperation, one of them set fire to a tree to intentionally start a forest fire. It worked. This brought the attention of professionals and helicopters. They were rescued and the fire was put out. I imagine California would be one of the worst places to do this. I've seen this. They were really close to death and it was a very desperate act, and the guy was like, frick it, I will burn the whole forest if I have to. I think it was in Cali. Good thing only a couple of trees burned and it died out. Police saw the smoke and checked it out and saved the couple. They broke up 2 years later though for other reasons. I've got one of my own. If you somehow come face to face with a polar bear, you should remove an item of clothing and throw it on the ground and then try to escape. Polar bears will always check every single inch of it. I'm pretty sure they have ADHD or something. Seriously. Reminds me of a way to escape from vampires. According to legend, they were compulsive counters. So if you threw a bunch of beans, coins, nuts on the ground, they'd start counting and you could run away. Red-brown mangrove trees mean salt water. When they start turning white inland, that means fresh water, in case you're ever in a deserted island. And provided we know what mangroves look like. This one sounds like common knowledge, but there was an incident in my area of Australia a few years ago with some tourists picking up and eating wild mushrooms. They didn't make it, so don't eat strange mushrooms if you don't know what they are, I guess. All mushrooms are edible, some mushrooms are only edible once. Ladies, if being pursued by an attacker, a good last line of defense is to roll under a parked car and scream for help. Rapists can't rape you under there and it will also be hard to remove you. If you become stranded or lost, don't move. Seriously, Do not move from where you are. Mark the area. Set up camp. Start a fire. But don't leave the area. You are much more likely to be found if you stay put. So many people have been lost for longer than they had to because they wandered aimlessly, even died. Accept you're lost and stay put. Set up signal fires and wait it out. If you've never had to look for anyone who was lost, it is heartbreaking to find where they were, but not where they are. And if you do move around, finding food, water, etc., try to make a note of which direction you're going or describe the area so if emergency services arrive while you're away they know where to look and know that you're not dead. If you are ever treating someone who has a puncture wound, when the bandage bleeds through, don't take it off. It may rip off the forming scab. When the injured patient gets to the hospital, the doctors will take off the bandages to assess a wound. To add, you can simply put more bandages on top of the one that's soaked through, if it's not stopping the flow. If someone ever has you in a chokehold from behind, do not hyperextend, lengthen your neck. You'll want to try and flex your head neck forward as much as you can, as if you're trying to bring your chin to your chest. Not only are you stronger this way, but it'll be harder, take longer for them to choke you since you don't have your entire neck exposed. I learned this during my psychiatric rotation in nursing school. We had to learn how to protect ourselves in case one of the patients came after us. Black bear attacks you? Always fight that bee. Go for the sensitive bits like the eyes and nose. Grizzly attacks you? Don't fight. You will freaking lose. It's a freaking grizzly. Act dead. Grizzlies are known to leave dead animals for later consumption. It leaves. You get out of there. If it's brown, lay down. If it's black, fight back. If it's white, say goodnight. Although according to another post here that last part should read if it's white throw some of your clothes at it and run while it's busy inspecting the clothes, but that doesn't rhyme. You can get poisoned from drinking the water from cactus. If you find some plants then try digging under them or around them for water. But it's the quenchiest. Unlike what is popularly believed, drowning people do not splash around and scream help. Help, they drown quietly and with little movement. Dead leaves are excellent insulators, even when wet. If you are in a situation where there are plenty of leaves on the ground and hypothermia is a concern, you can easily build an insulating lean-to against a tree that will help preserve your life. First, find a few sticks that are about your size if not larger. About 9-10 of them will work. Clear a spot on the ground right next to the trunk of a steady tree, getting rid of as much leaf litter as possible. This is important to make sure your lean-to is steady and won't slide on the ground. Next, prop the sticks up against the tree. Collect as many leaves as you can and begin to build up around the lean-to, starting at the base. It should be a fairly easy task. If the leaves keep falling through, some of that is expected. Add more sticks to the structure. Once the lean-to is completely covered in leaves, collect as many dry leaves as you can find and essentially create a squirrel's nest inside the lean-to. Put the leaves on the ground to insulate from the dirt and put more dry leaves on top of your body. Curling up is recommended to conserve heat. If you can't find any dry leaves, look for leaves that are drier than the rest. Never, ever, assume a woman is pregnant. Better to just play dumb until she or someone else confirms that she's expecting. Even if the baby is crowning, remain skeptical. If you're stranded in the woods, and rabbit is abundant, do not eat only rabbit. Seriously, since rabbit meat is particularly lean, the lack of fat can lead to protein poisoning. You'll feel sick or fatigued, and, worst of all, you'll feel like you're hungry. This can lead to you eating more rabbit to get rid of the hunger, which just makes you more sick. You have to find a source of fat, such as from vegetation or other animals, in order to recover. I've read it described as being better to only have water than to only have rabbit and water. How to make a solar desalinator to turn salt water into fresh water. Very simple to do with cling film and a bowl of some sorts. Thank God I always keep a roll and bowl somewhere on my person. If you ever get in a fight you know you can't win, calmly start taking off your pants. You'd be surprised how many people won't fight a pantsless person. Indeed, it shows you're confident, especially if you remove your pants and yell I will literally $% you up. Carry a seatbelt knife. glass breaker and flashlight in your center console. Glass breakers don't need to be swung to break a window. Put it near the bottom corner closest to the center pillar and press hard. In a fire, stay low, not just to avoid the smoke but to avoid breathing the hot gases that rise up. Taking one breath of gases heated to 200 degrees, which is essentially ice cold in a fire, will sear your lungs and suffocate you before you can cry for help. 1. Keep your morale high. I think everyone knows that you should carry a pocket knife, how to find water and treat it to drink, how to pick a campsite, etc., etc., etc. ad nauseum. The first and foremost thing that every person should understand is this. Keep your spirits as high as possible. Keep yourself busy. Structure your time as much as possible and keep yourself going. Ray Miss did a show with this advice, and it's part of what they teach you in ocean survival. Both included a version of this story. A large fishing boat was capsizing in the Pacific. The crew deployed the 2 life rafts they had, the captain and half the crew in one, the first mate and the other half of the crew in the other. The life rafts were secured together with 50 yards of line, rope. These rafts were the big orange kind, with the dome roofs that could fit something like 15 people each, and had some supplies like water desalinators, like a big plastic bag, caramels, water, compass, map, etc., etc. The crew were lost at sea for something around 60 days. When they were finally rescued by a passing ship, the first mate and his crew all climbed out of their raft under their own power. No issues. The captain and his crew were not so lucky. Everyone had to be carried off the raft, and out of the 15 people only 9 were left. The captain died shortly after. Why? The first mate knew to keep the crew busy and keep morale high on his craft. They set a watch. They tallied their supplies. They each had jobs. They played cards, supplied in the raft, and sang songs to keep busy if not working. They fished and collected fresh water from their desalinator bag unit. They used the compass to determine their location and their heading. They knew they were heading towards shipping lanes. The captain and his crew did almost next to nothing. They tore through their stores and just sat around trying to wait out a rescue. With no structure in tasks, there was no morale and the crew quickly despaired. Then they got sick. Then they started dying from hunger and thirst, and nothing but 50 yards of line between them. So try and stay positive about the situation. Know you overcome it and keep it moving. In a pinch, super glue can act as a band-aid. Just apply a dab of super glue over a small cut, and it'll control the bleeding and prevent infections. In a day or two, it should peel off just like a scab. Remember though, it's a replacement for a band-aid, not for stitches. With larger cuts, you run the risk of the glue flowing down into the cut and getting inside your blood vessels, which can be problematic. I use this all the time. Small cuts and stuff on fingers, hands where band-aids will last about 10 seconds. Most sickness from water isn't from lack of boiling but lack of filtering. You are more likely to get sick from what's floating in unfiltered water, rather than the germs in the water. The rule of threes. You have 3 hours to survive any hot-cold exposure, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food, and 3 minutes without an internet connection. Lost your sense of direction? As long as you know approximately what time it is and where the sun is, finding south is very easy. Let's say it's 3 o'clock. If you don't have a wristwatch, pretend you do. Turn so that the current time hour pointer, 3 o'clock on your watch, is in the direction of the sun. South will now be in the direction midway between 12 and the current time. So if the time is 3 PM, south will be between 1 and 2. I'm probably explaining it terribly, but it's a great way of getting your bearings if you have no other way of finding out. Keep in mind that if you're located south of the equator, I think this method will show you north instead. You don't even need a watch. So long as you know it's after midday, the sun will be roughly on the west. If you can figure out west, you can figure out north and south. You can tell how much sunlight you have left by holding your hand up to the horizon. Each finger between the horizon and the sun represents roughly 15 minutes of sunlight left. You should at least melt snow before consuming it for water. Snow itself is cold and will consume much more energy and dehydrate you. If it's cold out and you have to exert yourself by moving a long distance on foot, remove a good portion of what you're wearing. This will prevent you from sweating all over it and getting hypothermia when you stop. If you exercise just to warm yourself up, don't do it. The one thing that you should always have within arm's reach are a pair of shoes, because if there's an earthquake or explosion or whatever, broken glass will be everywhere, and if your feet are messed up then you're screwed. If a natural disaster is coming and clean water might be an issue, fill your bathtub completely with water while your water works. You can get big water bladders that are designed for this. They're cheap, under $20, and sit in your tub. They keep the water isolated from your dirty bathtub and contained so that the humidity doesn't start causing problems in your house. There's a special way to wrap your hands around a water bottle cap or an acorn top to turn it into a whistle. This will help you if you get lost in the woods. If you keep shouting, you'll lose your voice. Put your thumbs over the cavity of the acorn shell so your thumbnails make an angle. Blow over them and adjust until you get the whistle sound. I never really thought about it in a survival scenario, lol, I just thought it was cool that it sounds like a hawk. This one seems obvious, but I still see dumb pictures all over the internet and get downvoted for saying it. Stay off of the railroad tracks. Seriously, stop taking pictures on the railroad tracks. This is how people die. If you don't believe me, Google it, and railroad employees end up with PTSD. You can't always hear the train coming, believe it or not. Also, it's trespassing. If you ever have to kill and eat an animal, you need to leave the liver the frick alone. Lots of animals' livers contain toxic amounts of vitamins. This ended the lives of a famous Arctic expedition when they were forced to eat sled dogs in a survival situation. If you are traveling in hot weather and drinking lots of fluids, ensure you throw in some electrolyte tabs in your first aid kit, such as hydrolyte or gastrolyte, as you will lose salts and electrolytes when sweating and need to replenish them, and if the mix is too diluted, can be dangerous. Tape your toes with fabric tape to prevent blisters and cut your toenails before going on a big adventure. Drizzle bags in your backpack can have many uses. Protect items from water, rain, or collecting water in a pinch. Stashing food, stinky items. Wear at least one piece of bright clothing in case you need to be spotted. Know your area and always pack a jumper even if it's very warm and sunny. Overnight is always cooler and it can provide sun protection. Bring a map in remote areas and don't rely on your phone as batteries can die, signal can drop off. Google drops GPX map files on me, so I bought a GPS. Tell people where you are going, when you should be expected to return. Carry a basic kit. Water, basic first aid, torch, snacks, Cliff Bars, small battery and phone cable, sunscreen, hat, map and compass. Walk with purpose to deter snakes and warn them to hide, and respect nature and the wildlife. Stick to the path. What fact about reality terrifies you or gives you that dreadful feeling in the pit of your stomach? That every single person you know you will see for the very last time at some point. You will likely have no idea when this point comes, and for many of the people you still consider good friends, this may have already passed. This is hard to stomach. There are so many people in my life, my family, my friends, that I always assume I'll be able to see again, but I'll never know if that's true or not. Maybe I'll see them 1,000 times, maybe 10, maybe once, and maybe never again. For some people in my life, I can't cope with that idea. That in 10-20 years, every friend I have will probably be replaced by completely different people. The people in charge, those making life or death decisions on a day-to-day basis, are winging it, just like the rest of us. True terror is to wake up one morning and discover that your high school class is running the country. Kurt Vonnegut, Jr. It always kinda freaked me out how narrow our visual spectrum is. The naked eye is blind to most of the electromagnetic spectrum. There could be any number of scary things all around us and we never know. I'm constantly surprised that people don't seem to realize this. It's probably the single most important thing they could imagine, that we don't see most of what is actually around us. I have a huge family. Eventually I will have to cope with them all dying, one by one, and that when I pass, my family will have to cope with me dying. You might die first. That this is all real, and that my actions have consequences, not only for me, but for others. Don't be silly. Other people don't exist. The only things that have ever existed is in your mind. Death. I know some people already mentioned it, but thinking about the actual moment of my death freaks me out and tingles my spine. The fact that I'll eventually stop breathing and possibly feel it coming. That true this is it moment when I realize I won't get to be alive anymore. I hope that moment isn't filled with regret. That I could die any second from any freak accident and never see it coming. That I need to move around and fix things for myself. No one else gives a crap. The flip side being, when you do stuff, it's very satisfying, even if no one else cares. The first radio waves that were transmitted from Earth at a powerful enough strength to be possibly be heard from nearby star systems were the 1936 Berlin Olympics, headed by Adolf Hitler. So far they have only spread 76 light years distance. The Milky Way is 100k 120k light years in diameter. We are approximately 27k light years away from galactic center. The light from the sun that shone in the sky the day that Jesus was crucified hasn't even reached the center of the galaxy. If a person were to stand on a planet in the Polaris, the North Star system, and be able to look at the Earth through a telescope, America hasn't been founded yet, and Mary, Queen of Scots, has just been executed. Sir Francis Drake is currently circling the world at the same point last galactic year, which is how long it takes our solar system to orbit the Milky Way. Neither pterodactyls, triceratops, nor Tyrannosaurus rexes had evolved yet. Everything. Frick anxiety. A lot of people are commenting about death and their fears of losing their family. My family is already long gone, so what I truly fear is that when I die, no one will know of it and no one would be there for me in my last moments. I do not want to die alone. When I die, I'll be dying. I don't care who's there to watch. What terrifies me is the prospect of being alone all the time. Before that, I don't want to die without having ever actually lived. Two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe or we are not. Both are equally terrifying. Arthur C. Clarke. I hate thinking of people as people, not just things like me. It confuses the heck out of me that every person looks through their own eyes and they think too. Haha, it sounds stupid, but I can't imagine people seeing and thinking like I do. It baffles me so much that I can't even explain what I mean. I have shitload of homework for tomorrow. I have a shitload of homework for today. Chances are my parents die before me. As a parent, the likelihood that I will die before my child is so much more bearable than the thought that he might die before me. My elderly mom does not have much time left, and the grace with which she faces it makes me so proud of her. Your parents will always live on in your life. May they live a long, long time, and be healthy as well. The unfathomable size of space and the unknown. Looking at space in an unlit area, simply amazing and makes you wonder that I, and everyone I know, will one day not exist on Earth. In a little more than 100 years the Earth will be inhabited by an entirely new set of people. This isn't a fact, but it really weirds me out whenever I try to think of nothing existing. Not just my own lack of existence, but to have everything not exist. There wouldn't be emptiness, just nothing, with no one to care. It's strangely depressing. Perhaps it is strange because I'm applying the man-made idea of nothingness to something that it is simply incompatible with. This terrifies me. There would be no consciousness. There would be nothing. Gazing at nothing. Just being nothing. It's really difficult to conceptualize. Nothing would have ever lived, ever died. Nothing would ever happen or ever even exist. The whole universe would be just empty space. Nothingness. Often when I am on public transport or in large crowds, I suddenly realize that all of the people around me have just as much going on in their life as me, and they are all thinking about things. Like, there is just so much consciousness going on all the time that I am completely unaware of, and this fact makes it so much easier not to care about those people, which is terrifying. Every single second the collective consciousness of the human race experience about 150 years. That practically nobody in this world actually knows what they are doing. When you reach the age that you realize adults are nothing more than bigger children who are equally as selfish, scared, and ill-advised as you were, but now have control over larger responsibilities. This always scares the crap out of me, comma. Every second I spend on Reddit is one less second I have to live, but I'm not getting off Reddit. That someday, I will crap my pants, and I won't be able to clean it up myself. The reality about time, will it ever stop? I have always wondered that. Herpes is for life. Frick. That my boyfriend and I are either going to break up or be together forever. Not sure which one is scarier. Look at it this way, before either of those things happens, one of you could die. There, all better. Living a good life is the way you probably will be remembered the least. The fact that I don't know what kind of future my future children are gonna have to live through. I'm a nurse. I constantly see sick kids in the hospital. One day I may have kids. They could end up sick or dying in this same hospital. They may get cancer. That scares me almost as much as my own death. I may very well be one of the people I desperately wish euthanasia was legal for. If they wanted it, not for me to decide. I could slowly die one day. Frick. As a fellow nurse, I too wish euthanasia was legal for competent patients to ask for. If more people saw how people live out their last weeks or months in the hospital, euthanasia would be legal. That our qualifications, awards, ranks, social statuses, etc. are only as good as people make it out to be. It took millions of years for oil to become oil, and we're burning through that crap in a cosmic instant without any real thought. That everything I do, say or experience, anything that happens in my life, will ultimately have no impact on anything whatsoever. The idea that my very existence, in the grand scheme of things, means less than the presence of a grain of sand at a beach. I find that a little comforting. It means I can just meander about in my life and enjoy my little comforts without worrying about wasting time. The concept of infinity kind of freaks me out. Space just goes on, and on, and on, and on. That there are so many beautiful places on Earth and there's no way I'd be able to visit every one in my lifetime, unless I win the lottery. That, and having to deal with the death of my parents and my beloved cats. That one day my motto "don't worry, it'll be alright," somehow, just isn't applicable one day. That day, life will suck. That I may never be able to grow an awesome beard, comma. It doesn't matter if you have a beard on the outside, as long as you got the beard on the inside. Action Hank. We won't solve the issues with long distance space travel for organic life in my lifetime. It's very possible that we may never solve all of the issues, particularly when it comes to dealing with the effects of low gravity, muscle deterioration, that weird thing with the eyes. Heck, just the idea of faster than light, which means that this third arc is likely all we've got. Thus, it's more likely that the future will end up into Judge Dredd than Star Trek. We may never learn if we are alone in the cosmic void. One day, my conscious will not exist, and it will stay that way forever. There will be no change to it at all, ever. On the lighter side, my molecules will continue to exist. Theoretically, they could become part of some soil, which in turn would help nurture a tree. Therefore, I could become a tree, and I think that is pretty dang awesome. You need to watch The Fountain, you'll love it. That I'm alive. I think I'm depressed. Hey man, if you are depressed, I feel for you. I am not going to tell you to think optimistically in everything. Just think about talking to someone who loves you. I am just a stranger, but I wish you good luck and good life. I'll probably be dead before we figure out immortality. That we reduce people to statistics, but the only one that's accurate is 100% of people die, and that because we can't visualize stats or numbers or know everyone who dies, we lose perspective on things like the Holocaust. As they say, 1 death is devastating, 10 deaths is a tragedy, 100 deaths is just a number. Similarly, the fact that for the average person, after 2 generations dying, no one will remember you. That our current existence is environmentally unsustainable, combined with the fact that humanity does not seem to grasp what the inevitable consequence of unsustainable really is. I get freaked out when I think that one day, I will be kept alive against my will, wearing diapers and laying in a bed listening to the whims of those around me as they decide my fate. Forget death. Chances are at some point someone you love and hold dear will make a conscious decision to cut you out of their lives. They will decide that you are no longer worth the time or effort and just leave, never to be seen or heard from again. And you will know in your heart of hearts that you could have done something about it, but didn't. That murderers, thieves, diddlers, assassins, cults, cannibals, ventriloquists, and suicide bombers all exist and wish to cause harm to the people around them. Ventriloquists are truly menaces to society. That I can only do so much. I can do everything in my power, but there are always things out of your control. Crap happens. Guess I just gotta enjoy the ride as much as I can. Enjoy yourself. It's later than you think. Reminds me of all things, the Lion King theme. More to see than can ever be seen. More to do than can ever be done. There is no way we can possibly see everything there is to see on our planet. No human will, assuming they don't create an immortality pill, ever do this. There's actually almost a definable upper limit to the human experience. What are some very creepy facts? If you get a blood transfusion and get the wrong type of blood, A, B, O, AB, one of the symptoms is a sense of impending doom. There's a tiny little jellyfish which can induce the same sensation of impending doom, along with some serious pain and likely hospitalization. It's only tiny as well, about the size of a fingernail, although the tentacles are much longer, maybe about a meter long. It's called the Irukandji jellyfish. There is a genetic disease called Fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. When tissue is damaged, it is replaced with bone. Growths form underneath their skin and their joints lock solid. So over time those affected slowly become encased in a prison of bone just beneath their own skin. They usually have to choose between sitting or standing up for the rest of their life. By the end of their life they have to drink every meal through a straw and can barely move. And removing the excess bone with surgery is no option either, because the injuries from the surgery will create even more bone. The Colombian serial killer Pedro Alonso Lopez, who is known as the Monster of the Andes, raped and murdered over 300 girls from Ecuador, Peru and Colombia. However, after he was caught and imprisoned for 18 years, he was put in a psychiatric hospital. There he was reviewed, declared to be sane and was set free, in spite of his blatant avowal that he fully intends to kill again. Since he was released in 1998, nobody knows where he is or what he's doing. He is supposed to be 71 years old at present. He is known for being the most prolific killer ever. Over 90% of serial killers choose their victims through sexual desire. In fact, many serial killers have been caught because they return to the body of their victims to masturbate. Bacteria and viruses can be frozen for millions of years and still be viably infectious, and having never encountered humanity before, could have no end of catastrophic results should they be uncovered and manage to infect a person or animal. Not to worry though, it's not like millions of ancient pathogens are currently trapped in permafrost which is now melting bit by bit each and every day. Your eyes have a separate immune system from the rest of your body. If they get damaged in such a way that it affects anything other than your eyes, your regular immune system can attack the damage and will not recognize them, meaning your own body can permanently blind you. What's worse, your body cannot tell the difference between either eye. If one of them gets infected or damaged, your immune system can attack your healthy eye and take away your sight entirely. Mom, come pick up, I'm scared. Rosemary Kennedy was JFK's sister. She suffered from oxygen deprivation at birth and that unfortunately stunted her mental growth. She had a pretty decent childhood, but as she grew older she began to act out, afraid that her behavior would risk his political career. Her father, Joseph, agreed to have her lobotomized. Her mother, Rose, was against it and forbade him from doing it, so he did it behind her back when she went on a trip. After the operation, Rosemary's already low IQ was lowered even further, to the point she could no longer walk or communicate. Her family had her locked up in an institution and basically disowned her. They never visited and never publicly acknowledged her anymore. Rosemary died at the age of 86. Her mother never forgave her husband for what he had done. It's unknown if she had that low of an IQ. Though she did have some brain damage at birth, she was functional enough to read and write, and part of the reason she was lobotomized may have involved sleeping around and being defiant. She had an active social life. Imagine being lobotomized because the general standard of the family was people like JFK and RFK and you weren't living up to it. Remember that bath salts cannibal guy from a couple years back? He wasn't high on bath salts when he did that. That was just media speculation and balls. They only found pot in his system during the autopsy. We still have no idea why he flipped out. Cause he was patient zero for the zombie apocalypse that we didn't get. The Chankiri tree is a tree in the Cambodian killing fields against which babies and small children were bashed after their parents had been killed. The men of the ship Essex, the true event that inspires the story Moby Dong, avoided islands after being shipwrecked for fear of cannibals. The islands were settled and landing there would have brought salvation to the survivors. Ironically, because of this bypass, the men ran out of food and were forced to eat each other for survival. After raping his blindfolded victims, the Golden State Killer would be super duper quiet and pretend like he was gone, and right when the poor victims would start to move towards the phone or try to untie themselves, he would scare the freaking crap out of them. After listening to the minute hours of his crimes being listened in court today, this is just a cherry on the horrible cake that is D'Angelo. One reason that crows and ravens are associated with death is because they would often follow armies as they marched to battle. Being both carrion birds and extremely intelligent, they realized that a large group of armed men marching on one direction meant that there would be a tasty meal of corpses to eat soon afterwards. That's actually pretty neat. I'd like to subscribe to Crow Facts, thanks. Crocodiles can gallop like a horse. I don't like knowing this, so I am cursing you people with this knowledge as well. Fortunately alligators cannot. So that's how you tell them apart. Imagine being totally aware of someone performing CPR but you physically can't move or respond. Well, that's what happens when you get bitten by a blue-ringed octopus. You have approx 6 minutes between being bitten and someone starting CPR to keep your heart and lungs functioning to ensure you survive, all whilst being totally aware of what is happening to you. Neurotoxins are fun. The really creepy thing about this is one story of a guy who got stung, got CPR performed on him and survived, but went blind because he was lying on his back, eyes open, unable to blink because of the paralysis, staring into the sun. Imagine lying there, unable to move, unable to communicate, the sun slowly burning out your eyes and you can't shut them. Your brain can play tricks on you to make you see monsters in the mirror, called the Troxler effect. The Troxler effect is an optical illusion that affects how you perceive things, both visually and mentally. So that was the lady in my mirror. I once read that you should play dead if a bear attacks you, unless they start licking your wounds because that means they plan to eat you. That still haunts me to this day. If it's black, fight back. If it's brown, grizzly, lie down. The astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger most likely didn't die until they hit the water miles below the initial explosion. Astronaut and NASA-led accident investigator Robert Overmyer said, "I not only flew with Dong Scobby, STS-51L commander, we owned a plane together, and I know Scob did everything he could to save his crew. Scob fought for any and every edge to survive. He flew that ship without wings all the way down. They were alive." If the sun exploded right now, you would be blissfully unaware of it for just over 8 minutes while the energy travels at the speed of light to get to you. I hope it explodes at nighttime just to be safe. There's a spider that gives you a 3H long boner before you die from its bite. Edit. The boner it gives you is very painful. Die hard. Polar bears are the only animals that are thought to actively hunt humans. There's a YouTube video of a polar bear trying to eat a photographer who was in a protective bubble. You can see the bear's teeth rasping against the walls. Thankfully, the bear failed. Female mummies in ancient Egypt were always more decomposed than their male counterparts. They discovered that this was because male bodies were embalmed a lot sooner than female bodies. Female bodies were kept at the family home until they started to decompose in order to avoid necrophilia at the embalmers. According to Abe Lincoln's bodyguard Crook, He said Lincoln had a dream about his own assassination 3 nights in a row before he was killed. Crook told Lincoln not to go on that fateful night, and all Lincoln said was goodbye, Crook, before he went to the play. This was very odd, as Lincoln always said, good night, not goodbye. The last witness to Lincoln's assassination was interviewed on TV in the 1950s. I bring this up at parties all the time. When climbing Mount Everest, there's a point nicknamed Rainbow Valley or Rainbow Ridge because it's absolutely littered with the bodies of people who attempted to make the climb. The combination of the extremely cold temperature and the bright snowsuits means that they've become a never-rotting but colorful landmark. Mount Everest is covered in frozen corpses because removing them is very unsafe and time-consuming. They are easily viewed from the climbing routes and some are used as trail markers. After getting stung by a cone snail, you don't feel the sting for a little bit. There is no antivenin and it can be lethal. Treatment is basically keeping the victim alive until the venom wears off. Cone snails are pretty freaky. Some of the most deadly ones can kill you in 30 minutes or less after they sting you. Their shells are super pretty too, so any beachcomber should be aware of these creatures and know how to pick up a shell carefully just in case someone might still be inside. From Atlas Obscura by Foyer, Thurus, and Morton, Necropants. Reader's discretion advised. In Iceland, a long but time ago, 17th C, friends followed complex rules to obtain a dead man's skin to turn them into pants. 1. You had to get permission from the dude to use his skin after he kicked the bucket. 2. You would then wait until burial formalities concluded. 3. You would rob the crap out of your buddy's grave. 4. You would cut the waist and peel the bottom half of the body off in one perfect flay. 5. You would then steal a coin from a poor widow, preferably your bud's. 6. Place the coin in the scrotum of the necropants to attract cosmic crap, specifically more wealth in life, and leave the groin full of coins at all times. 7. Pass that crap down to your kid. Fun fact, the Museum of Icelandic Sorcery and Witchcraft has a pair on display for all of us sickos to gawk at. Necropants had me laughing, but it was downhill from there. Albert Fish, the serial killer, loved eating poop. I feel like that's the least creepy thing about Albert Fish. People don't take their antimalarial drugs when they travel because they hear bad stories about the side effects and they see native people in the areas living okay without taking pills every day. The truth is, populations native to malaria endemic areas have all passed through pretty intense natural selection for survival and have a host of genes that prevent them from dying or suffering the other worst effects. Also, most of the resistance is built up over time. This is why it's most common for children to die rather than adults. Whatever people have heard about the side effects of the antimalarials, getting it is so much worse. I, fortunately, have never had it, but I study it as part of my work and people have told me about having it and they all say the same thing. It is so awful you can't believe you're even still alive. It comes in cycles, usually 48 hours, and each cycle is agonizing and brings you the brink of death. Sometimes it takes you, sometimes it spares you for another few hours until it starts again. And there are forms that, even if you clear the infection with drugs, it still remains dormant in your system and can come back at any time. We lost our anti-malarial drugs for a period of 2 weeks when we visited India about 20 years ago. I was hospitalized with malaria 9 months after we came back. Edit. I need to clarify that I was hospitalized after being back in the US for 9 months. I spent a month in the hospital. Sorry for the confusion. The stonefish, an incredibly venomous fish living in tropical waters mostly off the coast of Australia and parts of US, can cause pain that only escalates with time. Eventually the pain will subside, but even after the barb is removed, patients have reported increasing pain 12+ hours later. Without antivenom or denaturing the venom with excessive heat, the pain builds and builds until the patients request euthanasia. Its spines hold the venom, hidden in its dorsal fins. Aboriginals living around the Great Barrier Reef have corroborees, large gatherings, and will during these gatherings hold reenactments of people being stung by this monster, for what I assume is either amusement, learning, or both. A black mamba is the fastest snake which can slither at a speed of 12.5 miles an hour, 20 km/h. They have neurotoxins which are fast acting, The venom shuts down the nervous system and paralyzes the victim. Its venom is able to kill 10 people and it repeatedly bites. To add on to this, there is an almost 100% kill rate and can kill in 20 minutes. If you begin to display symptoms of rabies, you will go crazy and die. There's no cure. Your brain will slowly melt until you're dead. The second you get bitten by anything, you should literally speed to the hospital. More than 7,000 people die annually due to the doctor's bad handwriting. The doctor needs to start typing or something. Ridiculous. They used real corpses in the 1982 film Poltergeist for the ending pool scene. The actress did not know until after the scene was filmed. Not just Poltergeist, but up until the last few decades, actual skeletons and bodies were used in Hollywood productions simply because it was cheaper than hiring prop guys to do it. Any old movie you watch, chances are the skeletons are real because you could saunter into any old medical supply store and buy a whole disused skeleton from a university medical department for a reasonable price. Cockroaches have been recorded eating human flesh, both living and dead, as well as fingernails, eyelashes, feet, and hands. The American cockroach and German cockroach are more likely to bite humans than other species. Pretty sure Australian cockroaches do something equally creepy, but as an Australian who plans to sleep at some point in the future, I'm not going to Google it. Blob fish in its natural habitat looks like a normal fish, but it lives so deep underwater that it doesn't use a normal gas bladder to keep itself balanced. Instead, it has a spongy skin that is slightly less dense than water, which becomes damaged and bloated when fishermen bring it up too quickly. It's not really the ugliest fish. It has just experienced something worse than one of us being thrown into outer space. Between sea level and space, there's 1 atmospheric pressure of difference. Between sea level and 2,000 feet underwater, their upper limit, there's 60 atmospheres of difference. In 2015, a young woman began to have headaches. They discovered that she had a brain tumor, and when the doctors removed it, they were shocked to see that it was a lump resembling skin that contained bone, teeth, and hair. But this was no parasitic twin. The mass was called a teratoma, or monstrous tumor. When the woman was an embryo, some cell tissue fell off and ended up where it wasn't supposed to be, her brain. It then developed hair and teeth while the rest of her grew as normal. My niece had one of those on an ovary. It had 3 teeth and some hair. Contrary to popular belief, the Space Shuttle Challenger did not explode. The fuel tank it was attached to did, and it forced the shuttle to change direction so quickly that aerodynamic forces tore it apart. The crew module survived the initial breakup, and it's believed that some of the astronauts were conscious for the long fall back to Earth. Upon inspecting the wreckage, NASA also determined that some of the switches were thrown, indicating that the pilot vainly tried to fly what was left of the shuttle before it crashed into the ocean. It was once discovered that a fir tree was growing inside a human body. Artem Sidorkin went to the doctors suspecting something wrong with his lungs. The doctors thought they were dealing with a tumor, but turns out he had inhaled a fir tree seed which had sprouted and had begun growing in his lungs. He also had a watermelon and a gum tree in there. If you stifle a sneeze, there's a chance you can damage organs in your head, including eye blood vessels, rupturing your eardrums, and possibly rupture a brain aneurysm. Which means there's a small chance stifling a sneeze can kill you. Better to be the loud butt with the sneeze that can be heard around the world than a dead loud butt cause someone told you to stifle that sneeze. I almost always stifle my sneezes. A Japanese secret human experimentation group called Unit 731 performed experiments on infants, children and adults without anesthetic. They would cut out stomachs and reattach the esophagus to the intestines, remove limbs and see how long people would die from blood loss, removed parts of livers, brains and other organs. They would expose people to diseases and then dissected them alive. In all, an estimated 500,000 people were killed in these experiments. Unit 731 was given immunity from prosecution by the US government in order for the US to get access to the results of the experiments. Ducks become cannibals due to boredom, of all fricking reasons. They can only be stopped by cutting off their mouths. Don't frick with ducks. If you're in a boat directly over the deepest point of the Marianas Trench, and you have a passenger jet cruising at 30,000 feet above you, you are closer to the jet than to the bottom of the ocean. What random fact could save your life one day? If you are overdosing on illegal substances, you won't get in trouble with the police if you call 911 for help. One day, you might try a new food, or get stung by a bug, and not realize you're allergic to it until it's too late. If food makes your lips mouth tingly, you're probably allergic. If you have any swelling at all, tongue feels heavy, you're probably allergic. If you experience any sort of throat or chest tightness, or have difficulty drawing in a breath, you're in trouble. That's especially true if it's a sting. You'll only get that reaction if you're allergic and having a full-blown reaction. Don't fool around. Don't delay. Time for an EpiPen and ambulance ride. To be clear, you must go to a doctor after using an EpiPen. It is not optional, even if the person feels better. If no EpiPen is available, antihistamines like Benadryl are better than nothing. See a doctor. It's not the type of thing you want to just assume will be fine. Kids might be oblivious. I've seen peanut allergic kids eat Snickers bars, swell up, and not have a clue. If you see a kid's face, lips, tongue start to swell or turn red, time to do something about it. PS. EpiPens have a needle on the orange side with an arrow pointing to it. That side gets pushed into the person having the reaction. It is not where your thumb goes. For EpiPens, blue to the sky, orange to the thigh. If there is any flooding in your area, don't take the elevator down into a parking garage. Take the stairs. I was in Houston for a wedding a number of years ago, and several people staying at my hotel drowned when they took the elevator down into the garage to retrieve their cars. This is the most terrifying concept I've ever heard. In Australia, if something bites you, do your best to identify it and go to hospital. This goes for stings too, land or sea. We have a pretty good track record of people not dying to venomous creatures. Feathery clouds, technical term cirrus, usually indicate a weather change. Burning a candle inside a closed vehicle like a car or plane, as long as common sense fire prevention is observed and as long as you're in no danger from loss of oxygen, can help stave off hypothermia. Your dog is more likely to attract a bear or cougar, especially a cougar, than it is to repel one. Cougars love to eat dogs. Around here, they'll follow you and your dog, silently, and wait for an opportunity to swoop in and grab the dog. They've plucked dogs from within meters of their owners where I live. Even if you think you have a badass dog, it's no match for a cougar. And badass dogs love to start fights with bears, lose their nerve, and then run back to their owner, with angry bear right behind. If one tourniquet isn't enough, add another. Never remove bandages on a patient if they bleed through. Just continue to add more on top until you can get them to the hospital or doctor. First thing in the morning, birds will fly low and straight to a water source. On the return flight they will stay high and stop frequently to rest. So you can either follow them or go in the opposite direction depending on how they are flying in order to find potable water. If you're drunk or have a drunk friend, make them sleep on their side, never on their back. After particularly social nights in college, if one of us were puking and not doing great, my roommate and I would put a book bag on the inebriated one to ensure he didn't roll over on his back to prevent vomit aspiration. Checking a text message while driving is a 4.5 second distraction on average. Increases the risk of crashing 23-fold. If you're ever swept away in a river, don't fight the current. You'll exhaust yourself and you won't win. Try to swim diagonally down so you can reach the side instead. Crayons make pretty good fire starters. For hypothermia, shaking equals sucks, but we'll be okay. Keep warm. Silent and falling asleep equals bad. The body is giving up. If a product has the word oxy in it, or is ammonia, do not let it come into contact with bleach. If you think your house or apartment is haunted and have been seeing, hearing or feeling a presence, get a carbon monoxide detector. You may be hallucinating and this is potentially lethal. Funny but real. Malaria doesn't always exhibit predictable symptoms. What feels like a cold or the flu could actually be malaria. The symptoms also appear after some time, even up to 4 weeks. So even when you're back from your holiday in a country with malaria mozzies, you shouldn't ignore what you think is just a common cold. Context: when I got malaria I thought my appendix burst. The disease was the furthest thing on my mind. People rush out the way they came in, especially at events and unfamiliar places. Take note of exits when you go somewhere. If a tornado looks like it's not moving, it's moving towards you. Also, do not hide under an overpass. It's like a wind tunnel at that point. In the USA, the majority of DUI-related fatalities occur after 10 PM on Saturday nights. Just a little food for thought. Brown coconuts contain oils that cause dehydration, so drink the milk of the green coconuts. However, you can burn the husks of the brown coconuts to repel mosquitoes. I just started replaying the first Kingdom Hearts game. There's a part in the beginning where you have to collect coconuts for a trip. I wondered why it would only let me collect the green coconuts but not the brown ones. I thought it was just a weird video game technicality. Till you need to chew an aspirin if you take one thinking you are having a heart attack. Need to break a car window? Aim for the edges corners, not the center where the glass is strongest. Was taught this by a friend who is a fireman. Was taught by a stereo salesman. If you're in an enclosed space like a room and smell roasted almonds, but no one is roasting almonds, you need to get out. That's what cyanide smells like. Never use water to put out a grease fire. Use baking soda or suffocate the flame with another pot pan. I see videos all the time of people putting water on fires that start in their kitchen one with water because they're freaking out and are inexperienced in the kitchen. The fire will get 1,000 times worse if you throw water on it. Just to sum up some other options from below, the following things are also good for assisting in putting out grease fires. The lid for said pan that should be slid across the pot to create a seal for proper flame suffocation. A damp cloth or towel. Salt. A fire extinguisher, specifically a Class K extinguisher according to our experts below. Thanks guys. Apparently use this method only if you want to do a lot of cleanup and possible repairs, but you shouldn't be afraid to use it if necessary. And of course, remember to turn off the stove. Flour is not a good substitute for baking soda either. Aerosolized flour is highly explosive. Check out some YouTube videos sometime. Shoots scary how flammable it is if it spreads out enough in the air. It's also a reason why silo fires are so dangerous. That's a lot of potential energy. If you are at the beach on vacation and one day ask yourself where all the water is gone, far beyond normal tide, run. This has actually saved lives in the catastrophic Christmas tsunami of 2004 because someone has paid attention in school. If you are ever being chased by a polar bear, take off an article of clothing and leave it on the ground as you run away. Polar bears have really bad ADD, and they will thoroughly inspect your dropped clothing before chasing you again. In these instances, your decision is if you want to be mauled to death or to die of hypothermia. The true reason behind this is that when the polar bear eats you, if you are naked, you won't upset its tummy as much. If you've been lost in the wilderness for days, upon your rescue do not try and down all the food and water in sight. The shock to your system can be fatal. Refeeding syndrome for those curious. If you come across a mountain lion, never turn your back towards them. They won't stalk or attack if they see your eyes face. Not all heart problems come with clear warning signs. There is not always an alarming chest clutch followed by a fall to the floor like you see in movies. Some heart symptoms don't even happen in your chest, and it's not always easy to tell what's going on. Nausea, indigestion, heartburn, stomach pain, shortness of breath, throat or jaw pain can also be signs of a heart attack. I know this is true, but this is also the worst thing in the world to know. Now anytime I have jaw pain from chewing gum, heartburn from food, shortness of breath from asthma, or mild chest pain, I occasionally pull muscles at work. I think yeah, this totally normal thing sucks, unless I tease a heart attack. To save your kids from being abducted, teach them to yell, "Help, I don't know this mother," as loud as possible to get everyone attention. A friend from high school was telling us one day that when he was 4 his parents taught to scream "frick off you pervert" if a stranger offered him candy, toys, a puppy, etc. He screamed this at the top of his lungs when he met one of his uncles for the first time. I was driving home with my dad about a month ago and we encountered a few deer. My dad said to me, Quizzica, if a deer is running across the road, it's better to just hit it than to swerve and end up in the ditch. But if there's a moose that's in the road, swerve and go into the ditch. Hitting a moose is like hitting a brick wall. I don't think he's ever hit a moose in his life and I've never seen a moose in the wild, but it's still advice that could help me later. If your garage door needs maintenance, leave it to the pros. Garage door springs can kill you if you remove them in the wrong way. Had one of the spring tethers rust away and snap. Made the loudest noise that shook the whole house. Springs are dangerous. Don't frick with them. One of the first signs of a heart attack, that is not often talked about, is a serious upset stomach. My dad just passed off a heart attack last month. They found Pepto-Bismol next to him. I hate to think it was preventable if he'd recognized this sign. But he was always having heartburn and stuff, and we just had a rich meal and cocktails, so he may have also just been having an upset stomach. He always had a sensitive stomach. The self-Heimlich. If you like eating alone, then people won't help you if you are choking. Place a fist on the top of a chair and lean onto the fist, then drive your fist towards yourself by thrusting upwards. So I read this as punch yourself or pretend to wank someone off in your chest. This should go without saying, but if you're in the shower, it's absolutely necessary to check for lumps on your breast's testicles. Cancer is no joke. Also, yes, men can get breast cancer, but testicular cancer in women is very rare. TFTGKS. Punch gouge the shark in the eyes or gills, not the nose like everyone thinks. I would assume gouging the eyes out of most things would stop them from attacking you. You don't have to pay money on any type of phone to call 911, so don't bother foundling for change if it's a payphone. By law in the US, all phones can call 911 without any changes. Even if you're in an office that makes you hit 91 or something to call out, 911 will get you to an operator. If it does not, that's illegal. All cell phones can call 911 too, even without a SIM card or plan, and all phones have an emergency call option where you don't need to unlock the phone to call. If you're stranded with your car in a remote area, burn a tire to draw attention. Kangaroos can't jump backwards. You'll thank me one day. One day you'll be out with a friend and a kangaroo will attack and instinctually you'll yell, "Get behind it." It's not funny, but you've learned something. Most bullies are not traditional cowards and will not always back down if you stand up to them. In fact, a lot of them are so overconfident that they will follow through. Not all of them are from troubled homes either. Some people are just that freaking evil. If you get stabbed, don't remove the item you were stabbed with. It's the only thing holding the blood inside of you, and removing it could result in a large amount of blood loss. If you get lost and have a cell phone but it says you have no signal, try dialing 911 anyway. Thanks to the FCC, emergency calls will go through any possible connection. This includes all networks, not just your carrier, emergency service channels, and even any available private networks, forestry, mining, military, ranching, etc. This also works with any country in the EU using 112. Also, if you're in a country where you don't know the emergency number, try 911 or 999 or 112 or whatever your country's emergency number is. Common emergency numbers will usually still connect to emergency services in other countries with other numbers. Ideally learn the number where you are, but if you haven't and need emergency services, just dial what you know. If you are trapped in a fire in a building, stoop low. The breathable air will be near the floor. If you're lost in the wilderness, follow a river downstream to find civilization. Don't do this in Africa or arid places in general. Rivers tend to dry up and stagnate downstream, and you should go upstream to where there is more water and civilization. If you're in a pool and there's a metallic taste in your mouth, get out of said pool. There's an electrical short somewhere in the water. The International Morse Code SOSs. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. If all you can do is tapping, then you have to add longer pauses between your long taps to distinguish them from short taps. My grandpa taught this to me when I was 6. It always stuck with me. If you have a firearm in the wild, 3 shots spaced 5 seconds apart will signal distress. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.